Hello Fast Fam, thanks for tuning in. I'm Craig Lieberman and I've been tinkering on cars since 1980. I've owned more than 40 cars in my life. Some were heroes, some were zeros. But never in my wildest dreams would I ever guess that 3 of my cars would go on to star in a motion picture franchise. My Supra, my GTR, and my Maxima all had starring roles in Universal's Fast and Furious movies. Over the next 3 years, I'd served Universal as a technical advisor. I helped choose the cars, procure the parts, oversee their builds, and support both production and post-production. I have some cool stories to tell about what it was like to build these cars and to work with the cast. I was there, on set, in the production meetings, working on cars, hanging with the actors, and consulting on post-production. So follow along as I tell the stories. Let's jump in. In this episode, I'll be talking about 2 cars instead of just 1. I get asked about these 2 vehicles so often, I simply had to answer the requests. So let's dig in. The first vehicle I want to talk about is Brian's Ford Lightning. We really only get to see it a couple of times, but for some reason people are fascinated by it. And why shouldn't they be? A 4,000-pound vehicle that could run with many cars of its time, the Ford SVT Lightning was quite impressive. For those who don't know what this vehicle is, here's a quick summary. Back in the 1990s, Ford took the ever-popular F-150 and released a performance version of it. The first version featured a 351 cubic inch engine making 240 horsepower. But in 1999, it got a new supercharged engine making 360 horsepower. Later, it was bumped up to 380 horsepower and 400 pound-feet of torque using the Ford 4R100 automatic transmission. Created by the Ford Special Vehicle team, the Ford Lightning was updated throughout the years. Back in the early 2000s, with a few mods to this engine, you'd see the SVT Lightning dipping into the 13s in a quarter mile. With slicks and some other supporting mods, it was common to see them dip into the 12s, and that was hella fast for the day. The Lightnings that we used were brand new and were acquired in the late spring of 2000. I can't confirm if they were the lower horsepower 2000 models or the 2000 model with 20 more ponies. But it doesn't matter though, as those ponies would never be put to good use in the movie. My notes say that we had 2 Ford Lightnings, but I think we may have had 2 more because this vehicle was being considered for a bigger role. What that role was, I have no idea. That, of course, didn't happen in either case, and the truck only appeared about 3 times. Once when delivering parts, once when he got pulled over by the cops, and once more as it smacked the curb in front of Racer's Edge. That curb smack, by the way, was 100% real, and like you, everyone on the crew who gave a shit about cars cringed. There were no performance mods on these vehicles, though. Nothing. Zero, zip, nada, goose eggs, not a thing. But they were still fun. With a 0 to 60 time of 5.2 seconds and a quarter mile of about 14 seconds flat, these things weren't exactly rocket ships for that time, but they were faster than most Hondas, Eclipses, and other tuner cars of that period, and certainly faster than most of the cars that we had on set. After the movie wrapped, I never saw the Lightnings again, except I did see one for sale on eBay many years ago for about $15,000, where the owner purported that this was an actual car from the movie. Can't really say, I didn't check it out. I've spent many hours searching for clues over the years, and it's just turned up with no more new information, so I suspect that these vehicles faded into obscurity because A, they weren't seen on camera for more than a few fleeting moments, B, they were bone stock trucks, and C, there were many other cars in the first few movies that were more desirable to collectors. And so this is one vehicle that will always remain mysterious until more information emerges. Alright, let's switch gears to another vehicle that didn't seem to get much love. I've been getting questions about this car for years, but I haven't talked much about this car simply because there isn't a whole lot to tell. We're talking, of course, about Tej's NSX. Tej was, of course, played by Ludacris, which is exactly the word I'd use to describe this car. Based on the emails, DMs, and conversations I've had over the last 15 years, people either love this car or they hated it. There seemed to be no one in the middle. Fans of the TV show Pimp My Ride seem to love this car. Pimp My Ride was a TV show by the former rapper Exhibit, of course, that took cars that were, well, how do I put those, pieces of shit, and turned them into piece of shit show cars, speaking frankly. Pimp My Ride was pretty much like all reality TV shows at the time. It was completely fake. Reactions were faked, and so were the stories. The mods that went onto the car didn't often stay on the cars after they were done filming, and so on. The styling choices they made and the modifications were widely ridiculed by many people, but for teens or pre-toons, the show was actually a big hit. Essentially, our NSX looked like it got pimped out on an episode of Pimp My Ride, and the final result was basically shunned by hardcore JDM fans, but other people seemed to love it. Neither group is right or wrong about their opinions, of course, but the backstory will help you understand how this car came to be. In fact, I had high hopes for this car when it was originally written into the script as a third car for Brian, as shown here. That was quickly changed, and it was supposed to become one of the cars that used in the infamous barrel race. But another last-minute change meant that the Camaro and Challenger would sub in for the NSX and the MR2 Spider. Since we were working off an early version of the script, we had to get to work modifying 4 NSXs. My original idea was to build something representative of the JDM styling trend. Although I tried very hard to get cool parts from Japanese companies, back in 2002, it was very hard to connect with those companies. Japanese tuner companies suffer from something that I call analysis paralysis and can't seem to make their minds up about anything, and that made getting cool parts very difficult. I wanted something like this, but we were going to have to make do with what we could source locally. That meant using a local body kit supplier instead of a JDM brand. Things like the wings would come from APR. With the body kits and wings fitted, it was time for the art department to choose the final look of the car, meaning what color it would be and what the graphics should look like. Once our art department finally gave some thought to the car, they came up with something totally original. Oops, I meant to say totally unoriginal. They essentially copied the Louis Vuitton theme and instead used the TJ letters to represent Tej, the character who would be driving this car. The choice to paint it gold was simply a matter of convenience, as we had a lot of gold paint laying around. Thankfully, only one of our NSXs would be modified this way, even though we used 4. The other 3 were each painted different colors to use in the warehouse scramble scene as quote-unquote nondescript rice rockets. That's what Hollywood called them back then. As for Tej's NSX, the wheels that were ultimately selected came from Lowenhart, according to my notes, but they made just a well-bent Giovanna's, because Lowenhart and Giovanna are pretty much the same company. The roof scoop I envisioned was supposed to look like the ones on the JGTC cars. Instead, Eddie Paul decided to build a scallop design. I didn't really care for that piece, mostly because it wasn't functional. In any case, other than the body kit, wheels, the wing, and the paint job, this car had little else to talk about. There were 0 modifications to this car beyond those that I have mentioned. No power adders, no nitrous, no racing suspension, no big brakes, and certainly no nitrous. Mostly I was disappointed because we couldn't build what I envisioned. As you can tell, I wasn't a big fan of this car, but I recognized that I wasn't the target audience for this style of car in 2002, and I'm still not today, but I respect the fact that some people love this car. Collectively, the NSXs appear on screen for less than a minute total, which was really frustrating given how amazing these cars were back then. Like so many cars in this movie and in the subsequent movies, the NSX was just a set decoration, just there long enough to delight viewers. So what happened to the NSXs after the movie? Universal still has the Louis Vuitton NSX, which was used in a music video not long after the movie. As for the NSXs that we used in the warehouse scramble scene, I have no idea what happened to those cars. I can only hope and pray that someone bought them and returned them to their JDM glory. That's it for this week, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.